Hey everybody, Seth David here from the world famous Nerd Enterprises Incorporated, bringing to you another special screencast. This time we're going to talk about how to get contacts from Google Contacts to your Notion CRM. And by Notion CRM, I'm referring to a CRM that you can build yourself in Notion. I did a video on that a while back, and what happened is I'm sitting here going, I really like using the sort of Notion version of my CRM. Google Contacts, if you're an Android user, you need Google Contacts because that's how you're bringing up somebody if you want to make a phone call to them. But at the same time, the mobile app for Notion is so good that I'm finding I like going in there, accessing the contacts that I've added to that CRM that I've built, and I can tap the phone number just the same to make a phone call to them. But this presented a problem in that I have a lot of contacts in my Google Contacts, and I wanted an easy way, let's just say, to get them into my Notion CRM. So my first thought was, let me just export a CSV file from Google Contacts, and then I can just clean it up and import the people I wanted. But I realized the reality is there's so many columns for so many things that I don't care about that come out of that Google Contacts export that I didn't want to do that. I also realized that I had over 6,000 contacts in Google Contacts that had accumulated over a long period of time. So the first thing I did was I created a habit, and I said every day I'm going to go through another letter of the alphabet, and I'm just going to wipe all the junk that's in there that just accumulated over 10 to 20 years, right? I had a lot of customer service emails from apps I don't use anymore, just a lot of garbage that Google tends to add in when you start interacting with an email address, for example. So day by day, I went through each letter, and then I got sort of more interested and anxious to get it done, so I started doing 2 or 3 letters a day, and I ended up cleaning up the whole entire list from like 6,000 contacts down to just under 400 in like less than a week. I got sort of obsessed with it and got through it. Now I wanted to create a process because I also didn't want every one of those remaining contacts in Notion. I only wanted to bring contacts into Notion based on people I really, plan to be in touch with on some kind of regular basis. So bottom line, I wanted to create a process where I could proactively do something in Google Contacts to trigger that contact to get pushed into Notion. Enter Zapier. So when I originally built this, because I wasn't sort of 100% sure where it was going, I created actually 2 different zaps. So the first zap, and I'm going to go through and build this with you in a minute, but I want to show you what I did, and then I'll go back and show you how I did it. So the first thing I did was, and sometimes with Zapier you have to work with what they give you in terms of what you can use as a trigger. So the only thing that I could use was newer updated contact. What I was hoping to do, as you'll see in a minute, is I was hoping to create something where that's basically said, if I assign a label to it, to the contact, then send it over to Notion. No such luck. So I had to do this where it's any newer updated contact. Then I had to filter it and basically say only continue if it's got, and here they call it groups, but it's the same thing as labels. Here they call it send to Notion. So first, if a contact's updated, it triggers the zap, but it's only going to continue if it's got that label in it. So at least I have control, and I just don't end up sending somebody into Notion because I happen to go in and like update a phone number or an email address, right? So I used the Zapier filter, and then what I did initially was I had it dump them into a spreadsheet, which I have open. I'm going to avoid showing it to you because YouTube gets mad at me when I reveal people's contact information in videos. Go figure. They consider it like harassment or bullying or something. So anyway, that's why I'm not going to actually show it to you. And the truth is, what I'm going to show you here is going to be combined. You don't need this extra step. When I finished building it, I actually kind of like the idea of adding these contacts into a spreadsheet. It has its uses, obviously, having contacts in a spreadsheet, but I will probably scrap it. In fact, once I'm done building the one I'm about to in this video, I will probably scrap these and just go with the finished product. So basically what I'm going to do is create a zap that skips this step and then go straight through to here, which is where we create the source item in Notion. So let's do that. And by the way, and this time, for this to show you, I'll have to just blur some stuff out. But I did create the label that's here, send to Notion, Right now there's no contacts in it. So the way we're going to build this is exactly like I showed you. The trigger is going to have to be based on just any kind of change or update being made in a contact or a new contact. And then it will only continue if this label is applied. Bear in mind an important limitation is if I do create a new contact, obviously I have to finish that before I can add the Send to Notion label. I think you can probably add it while you're creating it, but just depending on when that Zap actually gets triggered, you may have to go back and do something to get this to work on a brand new contact that you're adding. Okay, so just important to keep that in mind. So I've got the label here set up. If you don't have this, then obviously you'll click here where it says create label. And for iOS users, I'm sure you can figure out what the sort of equivalent is in your contact manager that you might use. But bottom line on this is I've definitely found it to be very handy to have my contacts along with everything else that I keep track of in my whole entire operating system here in Notion, because as you can see here, and if you for some reason haven't been following along with me for the last like 5 years, then you may not know this, but as you can see from my main menu here, I have literally everything here at my fingertips. If I'm working on a project, everything from the bookmarks I've associated with that project to whatever client it's associated with, and even contacts that I might be dealing with when working on that project, it's all here right at my fingertips. I don't ever have to leave Notion. And that's the name of the game here. So you can see here I've got my contacts database. I've got different views carved up based on how I want to see things. Obviously I'm blurring some things out right now so you can't see people's contact information, but this is kind of what that looks like. Okay, now let's go build something. So I'm going to say create a new Zap. Okay, and I keep trying this and it just never seems to work well. I never seem to quite get a good result. So I'm going to skip that. Okay, we want to set the trigger. The trigger is going to be based on Google Contacts, so I'll just say Contacts. And there's Google Contacts. Okay. And so here's where you know, when you're creating something like this, I had to just study what are my choices, right? Not a whole lot of choices. Either a brand new contact. Well, that's not going to work if I go in and edit a contact to, for example, just add that label so it pushes it over. Right? A new group, again, group is what they call label, but this is only based on when a new group is created, so that's not going to help. So here's new or updated contact. That's the only choice left. That's the only thing that's going to work. Okay, and then of course I will select the account. I only have the one Google Contacts account linked up in Zapier, and I'll click continue, and it wants me to test the trigger. I'm sure I've updated some kind of a contact at some point in the recent past, right? There's one. I actually updated her today. All right, so perfect. I don't really care. I just need a record that will work. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is create the filter, right? So that part was pretty easy, just establishing the trigger, but because of the limitations with respect to the trigger, in other words, what I would have loved to have seen is a trigger that I could have used that says when this label is assigned to a contact. That would have been perfect. So we're going to create the filter. Okay, and which means we're going to filter by condition, so only continue if, and again it took a little bit of troubleshooting, but I eventually figured out that over here on this end of things, groups is equal to labels. Choose condition contains send to Notion, and this is where we need to make sure that it's spelled exactly right, so 2 is not capital. Every little detail like that can matter on something like this, so it just saves you time to be thorough. Okay, so only continue if the group, the text of the group or group name contains send to Notion. Continue. And when I test this, it should tell me, it's sure enough, it does tell me it would not have continued because I know that the person who came up in the sample did not have that label. Okay, so that's perfect. I'll click continue. And then the last thing I want to do now is add a new contact to my Notion CRM. So this is going to be a little bit more involved in terms of configuring, because now I have to map everything based on what is available in Google Contacts and where I want that going in Notion. So the app is Notion. The event that I wanted to do is not add a comment, not add content to a page, right? I don't want to archive anything. I don't want to create a data source item. I do want to create a page. But be careful. Read the sort of appendix here. I don't want to create a page inside a parent page. What I'm looking to do is create a new record in a database. But everything in Notion is a page, so the way it's worded here is likely going to be something like create a new database page, right? Retrieve database, update. I don't want to search anything. All right, so, and sometimes this is what you do. I'm showing you this because this is what you're going to want to be prepared to go through. Not when you're building this, but when you're building anything else like it that you've been inspired to do based on having learned this process here, okay? So it's worded weird, but this may be what I'm looking for, right? Create a data source item. Let's try it. Okay, and sure enough, this looks like my database is here, but I'm going to go back over to Notion and go into my contacts, and it's called Nerd CRM. That's the name of the database. So if I just type CRM here, sure enough, there it is. And now I can see clearly that I can begin mapping everything. So the rest of the process is actually going to be very straightforward and easy, and then of course we got to test it and make sure it's working properly. So up here it's confirming, right? The data source is my Nerd CRM database. So the first thing we want to do, and what it's doing here is it's looking at the stuff I have, and it's asking me what to map it to from a prior step. So it's seeing what's in Notion, right? I've got a contact name, a mobile number. I've got something called conversations, and it's warning me that there's a 2,000 character limit. And sometimes what I'll do at this stage is I'll just open up a new contact here, because sometimes I need to look at, these are the properties that it's finding and confirming what I want to map and how I want to map them. So basically what this is saying is, hey, this is the stuff I see in your Notion database, and so tell me where to get the information from to stick in there when this zap runs, right? Obviously, logically, a lot of it's going to come from here, but it doesn't have to. I can put static values. I can put anything in here, right? So let's just kind of work our way down the list and decide what we need. So contact name, obviously I want to grab that from a previous step over here, and I'll just put first space last, right? So I don't distinguish first and last name. I have one contact name property, right? If I go back here, you can, that's really going to be what goes here in the title of what in Notion is called a page, what I'm defining as a new contact here, right? So contact name, and by the way that you know that that's what this is called is if I go back up a level here in Notion, right? And this is perfect for me to show you because you can see the layout of the database without the records. They're filtered out here. And so again, it's important when you're doing this mapping to confirm what is a thing called on, in this case, the Notion side, so I make sure that I'm actually mapping the thing that I expect to map, right? So back to that. So that's the contact name. Okay, mobile number, where am I going to get that from? Well, also from Google Contacts. And there's the mobile number. Now, conversations, you wouldn't know what this is. I barely remembered what it is, but it's a URL. And the reason I do this is because I have different messaging apps that I use with lots of different people. So one person, I might be accustomed to talking to them in Facebook Messenger. Somebody else, it might be WhatsApp. I found it very handy to have a URL directly to where those conversations are taking place so that I can click over and go have a chat with them when I need to. I love this. I've never seen a CRM have something like this. This is a perfect example of why I love Notion so much, because if I can conceive it, I can create it. And there's so many things that any other CRM I've used just don't really take into account, right? Another example, while we're here, that we'll get into eventually is preferred mode of contact, right? So again, Facebook Messenger, where do I normally talk to this person? I have that in Notion. I've never seen a single CRM that ever dealt with anything like that. Sure, they'll give you the ability to create custom fields, but to me, this should be so like obvious and inherent, right? So we're not going to get that. out of Google Contacts. Or if I wanted to get really technical, I could go grab the URL of this contact and stick it in there, and that would take me over to the contact, but that's not what I want. Now the status, I'm going to choose, and I believe I had something, it's right there, a new Google contact, right? I want it to come in with that as a status, so I know this is a new contact like I added in from this very process. So pointing to my getting things done implementation, which is like prevalent throughout all of what I've built in Notion. This is like kind of a form of an inbox. It screams at me to clarify the contact, meaning get in there and update them. You know, you'll notice here, like the default status here is a hot prospect, as in somebody who I want to get as a client or whatever, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to come in like this, which is going to kind of scream to me that I need to go in and first clarify, you know, what is the relationship to me? You know, which one of these do they sort of belong in, and so on, right? This is something I will get later, right? It's just much easier to do that manually. A booking link, also something I will add later. This is where a lot of people will share their Calendly link or whatever with me, right? So when they do, I'll stick it in here in their contacts on other things CRMs don't typically account for. And there's your preferred mode of contact. Again, I'm not going to get that from their Google Contact profile. That's something I'm going to add later. Do I want to include the time with date fields? No, I don't care. This is a company if it's not a client. Again, that's not going to come from Google Contacts. Notes, city, I can add all this. But let's just, email I definitely want, right? That's important. I don't know if this one actually had an email. And you can search. There, email's home. Work is actually what I want. I typically will be looking for a work email here. Okay, website I can grab, obviously all this other stuff, city, address, right? I have space for different social profiles in Notion. All right, content format, let's just say Markdown. I would definitely prefer that over plain text, right? And then continue. Okay, and then I'm going to test a step, but as we encountered earlier, it wouldn't send her over because she failed the filter. But it may be that this will just send it over because it's just testing that it gets sent over. So we'll check that in a second. Okay, I just published this. All right, let's delete this one. Okay, back up to here. And actually, so there she is, and she came over perfectly, right? I am going to delete her. And now we're just going to test it. So it's published, right? It seems like it's set up to work. And the beauty of this is, and the way I suggest doing it is don't take a whole lot of time mapping every little thing necessarily. Do kind of the bare minimum just to make sure it's working. And then test it, and then you can go back, once you know it's working properly, then you can go back and just, you know, add all the mapping and you just edit the step. Much easier. You'll save yourself a lot of time in case there's something like very wrong with what you're trying to do, and you know, you run into some extreme limitation in terms of how to do it. So let's name this. We're going to go here and rename it and call it Send Google to Notion CRM. Boom. Okay, and now what we need to do to test this is go into Google Contacts and find somebody and add the Send to Notion label and then make a change, right? So I'm going to find somebody real quick that I want to add here. And again, you're going to be seeing a lot of stuff blurred out. But all right, let's take this guy. And the first thing I will do is add the label, Send to Notion. This in itself might trigger it because I made a change and that change happened to be sending it to Notion. But just in case, let's go change something here. I'll remove his job title, right? And I'll kind of clean up his phone number or something. And save. Okay, now if I go back here, boom, he came right in. Okay, and let's see what came over. I got just his mobile number. I didn't get his email address. Okay, and I had two email addresses, but they're both labeled as other. That's why it needs to be work. Remember, it was that specific about that. So let's edit this, and I'm going to assign one of these as his work email. And save. That change in itself, as long as that label is still there, should trigger the zap. Sometimes will take a minute. I'm going to delete this one. Alright, let's run it. Alright. There he is. This time we got the email. So that's the thing. You have to be super careful about these changes. And now I know that this zap is working with absolute perfection. I can go back and, like I said, tweak the mapping to fix it. I would love to be able to say just grab any email, but because Google Contacts allows you to describe different types of email, work, personal, other, what have you, in order to grab any potential email that the contact has, I would need to create a property in Notion for each of those kinds of emails, and I don't want to do that. If you want to do that, you absolutely can. You can create 3 different email fields in Notion and then map each of them so that whichever one it is. What I prefer to do instead is make sure that I label something as work here. Now the next thing I'd want to do is manage labels and just remove the label send to Notion. Otherwise, anytime I go in here and make a change, it will send another copy of his information over to Notion. So this whole label is designed to be temporary. So ideally what I do is I add the label, then go make whatever changes I need to make, again confirm, and if need be just write up a list of instructions for when you're doing something like this. Like I might want to write myself an instruction that says make sure that you assign one of the emails to a work email because that's the one that's going to come over here, right? And so this is how you do it. Again, you can be a lot more detailed than I've been. I just wanted to show you the basic process for how to set this up and get it working. And hopefully, this will also give rise to and inspire you to come up with other ways of using Zapier to get information from anywhere that it might be and get it into Notion. Because that's kind of my goal in life these days, is to get everything into Notion, because as I mentioned earlier, my goal is to have everything right at my fingertips, including my contacts. And I think I mentioned this earlier, the beauty of this is the Notion mobile app works amazingly well. So as I get contacts in here that are important to me, it makes it very easy if I want to tap on their information in the Notion mobile app, whether it's to call them or send them an email or whatever, even to text them. I can tap into their phone number and just copy and paste it into my text messages, although at that point it's probably easy to just go to my text message app and send them a text that way directly. But you get the idea. It's beautiful. It puts everything right at my fingertips, and this way I still need Google Contacts because I'm still going to use that, and because I'm still going to use my Android phone. But this really helps me manage the contacts that I really need to work with on a regular basis through Notion. And in general, I also just love having these kinds of processes in place and knowing how to build stuff like this. And that's really almost more than anything else what I want you to take away from this is, you might use this exact use case, but it's more important to me that you look at this and get inspired and then reach out to me and let me know what ideas you've come up with now that you've seen this process.